This is the InKleined Podcast, episode 3, with me, Sam Klein. And today's guest is Ben Kean. He's a musician, originally from Plano, Texas, and me and Ben met on board the Queen Elizabeth. And since we met in November 2018, we really haven't had a sit-down conversation like this, so it's been really refreshing, especially during this lockdown period that we're all in, to have a meaningful, in-depth conversation with someone, especially someone as insightful as Ben. His perspective on life is something that I think we can all learn from, especially his main outlook that it's not about your purpose or what you have to say in life, it's more about who you say it to and the relationships you cultivate in life. And that's my main takeaway from our 2-hour conversation. So I really hope you enjoy it, and I hope you really appreciate Ben's time and his things he said personally about his life as well. So I think there's a lot to learn from here, and there's a lot to enjoy. So I hope you enjoy it. We've met before, we've been on ships, but it struck me like I've never had a sit-down conversation with Ben, and I've always thought, just your character alone, and then speaking to you, just whether it's at the crew bar or wherever we've been on board, out in port, wherever, that Ben's the kind of person that you just want to sit down and really get to know. I mean, do you get that a lot? Do people say that a lot about you?
I mean, I don't mean to brag, but I kind of do, honestly. People tend to really open up to me as well. I don't know. I think I have kind of an inviting, personality and demeanor, just like this little white blonde kid who, I think I disarm people somehow. But yeah, I mean, we always got along really well, but I was kind of thinking about that as well. Being in different departments, of course, I was friends with all of the photographers at one point or another. But I thought, man, me and Sam, I don't know if we ever hung out, just the two of us, really. But I'm super stoked to catch up with you, and I've been enjoying listening to your podcast so far. I'm excited to see what else you do with it. Yeah,
well, I mean, first of all, I guess, how have you been since we last met? I mean, because that must have been August last year.
It's been a hot minute, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I left the QE in August 2019. Were you on then? I can't even remember. All the contracts are running together. Well, I'm pretty good. I'm studying jazz arranging, a master's program at a school in New Jersey. It's 30 minutes west of New York City, which is super cool.
Nice.
Of course, right now it kind of sucks. Everything was online for the last 2 months, obviously. And it's honestly an insane time to be living in America right now.
Well, I don't know if... I don't know whether we can be political. I mean, I guess it's my podcast, so I can do what I want.
Sure.
But whether it's what you wanted to talk about. Because, I mean, out of my friends, there aren't actually too many that are Americans, so it'd be cool to hear your kind of insight on basically what's happening in America right now, because from especially a British perspective, where police brutality isn't, and forgive me if, I'm wrong maybe, but police brutality in the UK isn't really commonplace. I wouldn't say personally. You don't see it much in the news or whatever. But in America, it comes across as a different place where there's almost literally, I mean, there is a war right now, isn't there, happening between cops and the public. And it just makes me think about how lucky we are in the UK. However that came about, I don't really honestly know. But it seems like there's a real difference between a police service where the police can police by consent is what, basically the model that the Metropolitan Police was modelled on in the UK back in the 1800s. But then there's other countries, not just America, obviously it's important to mention that, where it's they police by force, and it literally is a police force. So, I mean, I don't know how quite to succinctly word the question, but I mean, what are your thoughts on it right now? How did it happen, Ben? Tell us how it all happened.
Well, it all started with, I mean, seriously, it's been a problem always. You can't separate the history of America with the history of oppression of Black people. And that's just how it is. And I think it's important to acknowledge that police forces in America, like primarily, were tasked with, at one point, returning Black people who were freed back to their former slave owners. I mean, there's a really problematic history of policing in America, and it's kind of insane, everything that's happening, honestly, but it is so important, you know. I heard a quote the other day, I think it was Martin Luther King said, riots are the language of the unheard, which is so profound. Yeah. And obviously that's what's happening right now, regardless of the color of your skin. This should outrage you, you know. It's been going on for too long. But yeah, I mean, my personal feelings about it, I don't want to get too much into it because as a white person, I don't feel it's my place to necessarily say anything other than it's really sad. You know, my heart breaks for our Black brothers and sisters in America who are probably afraid to go out right now. And if you can join in the protests, I would definitely encourage that wherever they are. I know that there's some protests even in the UK, and I heard about some in Germany as well.
Yeah, I mean, there have been actually some demonstrations in Manchester, which is fairly close to home for me. Nothing on the scale of the likes you've seen in New York, which is understandable, of course. The proximity's different. Sure. The relationship's different. But it's a worldwide outcry, really, for what's happening in America. Because when I first came across the video, just on social media like everybody else, it genuinely struck me so hard. I was almost moved to tears. It was so unfair. It was just so unfair. That was the thing, especially when you look into what happened leading up to that. The guy was just, he didn't do anything wrong. He was mistaken for, what was it, writing a bad check?
Or something like that.
And then, insane. Like, what struck me even as well was like, when he was unconscious, it's just like he's unconscious. You can't subdue anybody more than that. And even in the UFC, which is like perhaps the most violent sport in the world, the ultimate fighting championship, like those guys, as soon as the guy goes limp, the fight's over. Even a UFC fighter doesn't carry on. So what possessed that police officer to carry on? Just because everybody knows once someone's unconscious, either the blood flow is restricted to their head, or they're not getting enough oxygen to their head. So they're going to die soon after.
It's really crazy. I mean, there's so many police officers on various forces, various precincts who should not be police officers. It's clearly like that man was one of them. There's a certain type of person it takes to be able to assess a situation with a clear head and move forward with appropriate action. I mean, the only appropriate action there was maybe talk to the guy. You know, and we see senseless killings like this. I mean, you know, anyway, I don't want to get too much into it, but clearly he did nothing wrong. You know, it was just a call about a potentially bad check, and it's really sad. I mean, I've been listening to the news every day and was genuinely moved to tears this morning hearing about yet another Black American killed by police. So
yeah, I mean, we can leave it there because it's just the more you talk about it, it just enrages you, and I completely understand like that feeling that you had this morning, especially because on a complete tangent in my life, I'm currently undergoing a police application for the West Midlands Police, so that's Birmingham in the UK.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and it's something I thought about personally when I was about 20, so sort of halfway through university, and I thought about it because the bottom line of it is there to, the bottom line is you're not there to make money. You're not there for fame, glory. The bottom line is every day you come home and you have, you should have, without a doubt, left a positive impact on your community that day. And that's what led me to it, because you get quite disillusioned, and perhaps this is a nice little segue now into life. But I remember certainly around that age, you get quite disillusioned, and I am now, with what you're meant to be doing with your life, what you're here to say. Are you even meant to say anything? Is consciousness just a misstep in evolution? And the whole thing about what are you and what are you meant to do doesn't matter anyway. So you end up thinking all these things. And what led me to then arrive at the police was, that just sounds ultimately good, and that's it. So I mean, I'm interested to know now, because I don't actually know much about your backstory at all. So then that makes this not only like, you know, a catch up, but genuinely an intriguing conversation. Like, basically, have you ever felt that feeling of being disillusioned growing up, or was it always to become a musician, or was there anything else where you just struggled with, I'm Ben Kean, but what am I here to say?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's like kind of my constant struggle, is like, what am I trying to say? Yeah. So, man, that's a great segue, great conversation starter. I guess I'll say, when I was a kid, I was definitely less concerned with the personal importance of my life. And as I got older, I started to get into music. I've wanted to do like tons of different things in my life. Like, even at one point when I was a kid, I was watching too much TV with those like online university commercials. So when I graduated from the 5th grade in the States, we have our schools generally separated from, after the 5th grade, you go to a different school from 6th to like 8th grade sometimes.
So does that mean like junior to middle school? Is that the jump?
Yeah, sort of like that.
Cool.
And so we would have like graduation ceremonies when you're done with 5th grade. And at one point I was like, I want to grow up and go to ITT technical, some random school that was advertised on TV. And I was like, I want to be an engineer. But I didn't really want to. I had seen so many of those commercials, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've played hockey, and at one point wanted to be a hockey player.
Ice hockey was that?
Yeah. Believe it or not, growing up in Dallas, Texas, I played ice hockey of all sports.
I was going to say, yeah, the first image in my head came of field hockey, but I was like, no, it's America. It must be ice hockey. Oh, well, that's cool. I mean, I never would have even thought that. I mean, that's not to put any assumption on you, like, but it just would never have come across that you'd wanted to be an ice hockey player. Yeah,
I had wanted to be like a baseball player and a football player at one point. I used to be quite athletic, but it came to a point in my schooling where I was kind of forced to choose between my football team and playing in the band. I had just gotten to high school, so I was like 14 years old. And, you know, I was like this pubescent little monster, and like, I loved being in band. And then I did a football practice and I was like, this sucks. So I'm going to do band because it's actually fun. That's
actually a dilemma that basically no one has. Whether do I join the band or the football team? Because you could look at them as like two completely different things. So that, you know, you're a well-rounded, you know, person to begin with to have that dilemma. So it's a good choice to have.
I suppose it is. It's a little bit uncommon, but just with how the schools are set up, particularly where I grew up, I knew a couple of people who had to choose that. But yeah, so once I started like studying music a bit more seriously, I really thought like, what are all of the things that I want to say? Like what is the kind of like career trajectory, you know? And suffice it to say, Sam, I have not narrowed it down a single bit.
Is that because there's a quote that I can't remember, so that helps, but I was studying once for an essay, and I came across this filmmaker because one of the things I wanted to be in my life was a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy invented this set of rules in filmmaking that he just limited himself to, because he found within this narrowed spectrum of creativity, suddenly a whole other world was made clear to him, because it was like refining his craft. So then basically, are you saying now you don't really know where you are, what you want to do still, or have those feelings, because once you hone it down to music, or then a single instrument, or then using that instrument, a single genre, then you suddenly find, just like this filmmaker said, once you just refine your craft further and further, the possibilities just become like greater and greater in a way.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good way to put it. I certainly go through phases where, I'm a writer. I study jazz composition in school, but I'm also an instrumentalist. And I find myself often like going back and forth. Like right now, I'm really obsessed with playing flute. I'm a saxophone player, sort of originally, but I also dug up my old guitar out of my storage unit because I've got a lot of time on my hands. And I've been really into Animal Crossing songs.
Yeah,
there's some really catchy ones. Fun fact, the guy who wrote the music for Animal Crossing, he's completely legendary. And I'm so sorry that I don't have his name, but y'all can look it up. The internet is a thing.
Oh, I've heard of that, yeah.
But the guy who wrote all that music is the voice of Yoshi, as well as many other Nintendo characters. And he's like the head of Nintendo Wii Music. So he's a very accomplished man. He's got some really nice tunes.
So he's kind of like the Randy Newman, but of Nintendo.
Oh my God, I never thought of it that way, but that's perfect. He absolutely is.
But an unsung hero. Like, everybody knows Randy Newman.
True, yeah. I imagine probably more Japanese people know about this guy, but...
Oh, is he Japanese then?
He is Japanese, yeah.
Ah, right, okay. Yeah, well, maybe that's why we haven't heard of him over this way. But still, I mean, his music, I would have heard of it, and not realised it was him.
For sure.
I mean, and back in the day, I could do a pretty good Yoshi impression myself. I always chose Yoshi.
You still have it in you?
Nah, because, that prepubescent age you're on about, 14.
Oh, sure.
Like, that,
You've got a specific voice at that age. It's like,
you do, yeah.
It's not quite developed all the way. It's like when Justin Bieber like grew up and then he sucks now.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have the voice of a prepubescent Justin Bieber. I could sing really well. But
no way.
I could sing a bit actually. I had a solid Yoshi impression. I could actually sing a little bit. Like, I went to theatre school and all that.
Wow.
Because one of the things I wanted to be was an actor, even though I'm quite introverted. But I wanted to do that, but then I completely lost it then. I mean, I like to sing, and I think I can, and I do in the car, but that's as far as I'll take it.
The world needs more car singers.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, if people just recorded themselves in the car, I mean, there's so many unsung heroes, like the guy from Nintendo, that you'll probably find, but just don't have the confidence to roll the window down even and just sing to someone on the pavement. Yeah.
Man, someone should do a project, car singers, with all the... I've been doing a couple of like a cappella type videos where I do a bunch of recordings of myself. But I think that would be fun for someone to do like a car singing. Someone out there, get on that. But speaking of projects, I was saying that I get into, a bunch of different things. I sort of will go really hard for like maybe a month or two on like some specific things. And
guitar, you were saying. When
like guitar or sure. But right now I've been, that question of what am I putting out into the world? Like, what is my purpose maybe as an artist? It used to be so important to me, but as I've gone about and, I've traveled and met people and studied with all kinds of different people, and learned about the tragic lives of so many jazz musicians or just musicians, artists in general who never are appreciated in their lifetimes. I'm starting to appreciate more the value in just really digging into something that's personally rewarding for you, regardless of whether anyone necessarily listens to it. Like, I've been doing this thing lately. I've gotten into poetry in the last year, and I've been doing some really short, I'll like read the poem out and record myself reading the poem, and then I'll orchestrate something to accompany that poem. And this is something that I can do in quarantine specifically, that's like artistically rewarding for me, and hardly anyone will ever hear it. But
I guess that's not the point though, because I mean, like what you just said there is something that I've fairly recently, honestly, been trying to like instill in my own brain, is that to feel truly fulfilled, it has to come from within, obviously, and then that external gratification, it doesn't actually lead you to feeling any more fulfilled, because that can go in an instant. But conversely, those poems that you're speaking, into your microphone in your room alone, maybe, and composing your own tracks to them, that won't go away unless you decided to. So that's always going to be there. And is that, growing up myself, I had this stigma of, if that's the right word, stigma, but I had this notion that if I was well known for something, then I must therefore be doing well. But it's completely the opposite, even if you find that no one besides, I don't know, your close family listens to what you've made, that's still, that doesn't define it, does it? It's all about the craft, the process, and what keeps you actually going to the microphone every day. But it's taken me almost 25 years to finally come round to that thought. It's kind of sad, really, but at least I've had that.
Hey, some people never have that realization their entire lives, and just always are seeking to break into some kind of scene. And it's like, it's good to have career goals like that. Like myself as a musician, I would like to gain like some notoriety among musicians, just so that I can continue to make music with other musicians. But the actual notion of being like famous or something, or like being well known by a lot of people for, doing something really significant, that's not so much important to me anymore. And something that helped me to realize this actually was when I was playing the last concert I played at. A couple of my friends were unable to make it, and like somehow when I looked out into the audience and I didn't see anyone who I loved there, that felt so terrible to me. And I sort of realized, like, wow, is the reason I make music like just for myself and the people who I actually care about? Like, do I care about pleasing any of the like random people who are in the audience? Even if they were personally touched by that music, I mean, that's great. But that initial feeling of wanting to perform something that's special to me for the people who are special to me.
Wow. Because that feeling you just described, looking out to the audience, from my own experience, like just for a few years in high school, I played the drums in the band, and I wasn't especially good. I could just limp my way through a show. And
I know the feeling.
Well, I mean, you're a pro musician now, so imagine how bad it was for me, especially because like the drums is maybe like the loudest. It shouldn't maybe be, but it definitely was in our band when I was playing it, the loudest instrument. So when I messed up, it was bad. I don't know whether it was for that reason, but I always purposefully told my family and anybody that I love not to go to watch, because if they were there, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And I mean, like, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. I think it's because I loved them, and because they're my family, I didn't want them to see me fail. But I like how you described it, how you wanted to perform for them. Regardless if you failed, you had something inside you. You connected to music, I guess, and then wanted to share that with them. I mean, that's that's a nice goal to have. I mean, and that obviously still exists now, I guess. It's there for yourself and the people you love. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you then think overall of getting into a career in music? Because we've kind of briefly outlined sort of growing up and finding your feet into music. I mean, have we? Unless you want to just talk on that some more. Like
about growing up and getting into music?
Yeah, like was there any other tangent or defining moment, like when you really nailed the show or found a mentor?
Sure, yeah.
That led you into music, before I go on and then ask you about the daunting prospect of finding a career in it as well.
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about my musical upbringing and experiences. I had a guitar for my first instrument, and it was really a terrible instrument, but we took it to this local music shop, and the guy who owned it gave me new strings. It was strung backwards, as if for a left-handed player.
Oh, right.
You have to have the strings in the opposite direction, and also the strings. I'm not left-handed, but when we bought the guitar, we didn't know any better, and I was trying to play it the wrong way, and so we took it. I'm right-handed, but the guy at the music shop realized what had happened, and he also realized that the strings were not very good, and they were nylon, which is for classical music, which is not the thing that I wanted to do. So anyway, that was one of my first realizations that like musicians can look out for each other and like care for each other, which I don't think that you would experience that thing. I don't know. I guess it depends on the person. But this particular man was like definitely important. He's the guy that I bought reeds from when I started to play saxophone, like throughout my high school. The whole time I lived in my hometown of Plano, Texas, I went to this guy. Unfortunately, he's passed on, but he was definitely like an important part of my upbringing, and even if it was sort of in a tangential sort of way. But I started to play saxophone when I was like 10 or 11 maybe. And this was for school. We had to pick strings, voice, or band. And I wanted to do band. They gave us a little test. And so yeah, I started to play saxophone, and I sounded like a goose for a very long time. And I don't know, there were lots of times actually where I didn't want to play music anymore. I was like, man, this saxophone case is so heavy and I have to walk to school. It's stupid. I almost quit band like 2 or 3 times. But the funny thing is, it was always my band friends who were the ones to convince me to stay, because, you know, we had just gotten so close over rehearsals and that kind of thing.
Well, that makes complete sense, because, I mean, you're part of a gang, a team in the band.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever you want to call it, is that
There's
sense of
definitely
community. Yeah.
that camaraderie, for sure, a sense of belonging, which is so important, especially at that age.
Yeah, because what age are you talking now? Are you talking around 14 again? Or later on?
Yeah, around then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I guess when you're talking about the football thing as well, it's 2 different kinds of band, because on the one end of, you know, of the choices you mentioned earlier, like the football kind of thing, compared to the camaraderie and sense of belonging you get in a band where you're playing like your own instrument and you're responsible like as a whole cohesive thing for the piece of the music. Like this whole, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like this whole like organism where if one instrument starts to break down, that'll affect the entire like performance, I guess, of the entire band. And I'm just speaking from what I've seen in the Royal Court Theatre, so that's just what I've seen. But I completely understand how that sort of kept you going. To band practice. I mean, obviously, you know, now it's a good job you did keep going. It's got you to where you are now, and you know, got you to travel the world. So
yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's basically kind of where I'm going with this now, because finding a career then with music. I mean, maybe a lot of people in that band from high school aren't professional musicians now, like yourself, or studying like yourself are for a master's. Sure. So I don't know where, like being a musician, I guess it's similar to being a photographer like myself, or whatever I can call myself. When you're in a creative field, how you subsidize that going forward. So more recently then, and I'm talking maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, what's been the new challenges like of keeping you going? Is it just the passion for it? The fact that maybe, you know, it's just so part of you now, you can't imagine doing anything else anyway. And like, where do you plan to like go from here?
Sure. I want to say that for creatives, like you're a photographer, I'm a musician, there's always multiple streams of income that you sort of have to rely on. And I think that's kind of a common misconception about having a career in music, because a lot of parents will tell kids like, oh, you don't want to be a musician, you know, there's no money in that, or you're like either living a rock style or a rock star, you know, lifestyle where you're like never home. And I mean, the reality is if you're a musician today, you're probably going to be teaching in some aspect, probably juggling that with your own musical projects. And I would say that the juggling of all of those things is easily the hardest part about being a musician. Because sometimes when you do the thing that you love for money, you can lose sight of the reason you started doing it in the first place. And especially when I went to school for jazz in my undergrad, I definitely kind of lost touch with why music was cathartic or rewarding to me in the first place. And so I think that is a challenge for sure. That's a challenge that I think people don't talk about very much. It's probably the reason that people will leave their careers as musicians. It's because they don't enjoy it anymore. It just became so stressful, and it is very stressful. And the thing is, I always say, if you're a musician and you can see yourself doing something else for money, then I would say do it, because in my mind, that's a way of protecting music as an outlet for you. Yeah. Like if you could be an accountant and then just be fine with having your like musical projects on the side, then do it, you know, because if you can protect your enjoyment of making music, then I think that's the most important thing.
Well, because that is personally as well something I've been really struggling with. It's a different medium, obviously, like photography, video, whatever I mean, I still don't even know which of the two I truly love either, but I've definitely become...
I feel that struggle.
Well, yeah, because I guess for you it's instruments rather than genres of music even, yeah. And it's just, you know, it all falls within the camera, but I have definitely found within the last year or so my passion for, you know, image making, let's call it, not just call it photography or video, just image capturing, whatever, has dwindled to myself really asking, why am I doing it? And then when I'm posed with this challenge now of finding a career in it, especially sort of after, you know, cruise ships is looking less and less of a possibility in the near future or even long term.
Sure.
But it's like, I ask myself, do I want to work for this agency? Do I want to become... It all basically comes down under the banner of marketing in the best possible way. If you're going to make a career and a living as a photographer or making videos as a videographer, it's all essentially marketing. And then how I feel about that fundamentally, I don't know if my passion for it's there. It's been a real hard thing to juggle. And yeah, it sounds like you've had that similar sort of thought, but a while ago, because I like how you've already considered and thought about that option of, if there's something else you can do it, and you still have your passions be your passions and your job be your job. And that's almost what's led me to applying for the police now, finally, after like 4 years of considering it. Wow. Just because I've kind of realised that, you know, maybe rather than just have it in the back of my mind all the time and fight it whilst I pursue a career that maybe isn't quite as fulfilling as I thought it'd be, I can just actually acknowledge that voice is there for a reason. So, I mean... Gosh, I mean, that's just myself actually now, spouting my own insecurities, but...
No, it's good, man. It's your podcast.
I guess, yeah, that's what it's there for.
I'm inclined to listen.
Well, I'm glad someone is. But I mean, with that in mind, though, it's important to find those periods of why you're doing something, especially. Definitely. So I've got another segue for you, Ben.
Let's hear it.
Are you ready? Are you strapped in?
I'm absolutely strapped in.
Cool. Okay. Because you're on about music and enjoying it just for the sake of playing music and having that not be tarnished in the quest for a career, which is a very noble goal. But when I was thinking about this podcast and thinking, what do I talk about to Ben? One thing that immediately came to mind was a story you told me in New York. And maybe my own memory is like biased what actually you told me. But you said that you took your saxophone out and found some people to jam with in like the subway of New York one night on an overnight docked in port. And it was like one of the best overnights in port, maybe one of the best nights in your life. So I mean, that basically defines just playing music for the sake of it, hands down, doesn't it?
Yeah. It actually, it wasn't in the subway, but everything else is right. Yeah. There's a part of New York City called Greenwich Village, or just the Village. And this is where like a bunch of the famous jazz clubs are, like Village Vanguard and Fat Cat, Smalls. And you can find a jam session, like it's usually pretty late most days, like after 10 or 11, sometimes midnight. There's even jams that start at like 1 or 2 in the morning. They're like the late night jams, and they go pretty much until the sun comes up sometimes. But yeah, we had an overnight, and I was so excited because I had never been to New York. And I took my saxophone out after we were done playing for the night. And I don't know if you had met Secho, but he's a Hungarian drummer who worked on the Queen Elizabeth as well. But he was on at that time, and we went out together with a guitarist as well. And yeah, we went from bar to bar to bar, and we played jam sessions until like 3 a.m, and it was absolutely amazing. And obviously, I didn't get paid by anyone, and that's one of the beautiful things about jazz in particular, is that there's this sort of agreed upon language. There's a bunch of tunes that, it's kind of assumed that if you're a jazz musician, you'll know a bunch of these tunes by heart. And so you can get together with completely random people you've never met before and make some music. And there's a certain energy in New York City that is just so contagious. I knew a guy once who said, I don't know what it is about New York, but everyone just plays better when you're in New York.
And did you find that to be the case? Did you?
I actually did. I didn't know if I believed it, but I really did. I found myself just like playing stuff that I never would have played, just in my room or like jamming with my friends. So it was definitely exhilarating and reinforced my desire to come up here to study.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice full circle then, to be honest. I mean, you were on about those tunes that every jazz musician will know. Is that, I'm not, a jazz musician in the slightest, but are they known as like standards or jazz standards? Is that what you call them?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So then, I mean, what would the examples of them be?
There's some ones that, probably everyone will have heard, like Fly Me to the Moon. I mean, there's so many. Some that I've been working on recently are If I Should Lose You and Emily. We would play some on the ship sometimes as sort of like a segue in between our like stock arrangements.
Right. So then you find that when you say that you jam to it, then do you just jam to the melody of it, and then someone plays the melody, and then the other people go off on that melody and go into their own thing, or do you play the chord sequence to it? I mean, how does it?
Yeah, it's like usually someone will play the melody. Sometimes there will be like an intro, sometimes not. And then once somebody plays the melody, you just play the same chord changes from the melody, and people improvise over it. Usually people like take turns, take solo, and then next person takes a solo. And usually you play the melody again at the end, and then there's some kind of ending. The fun part is always at the end, I think, because there's never like a stock ending that always gets played. There's tons of endings to a tune in jazz that are like commonly accepted. So like b-ball, ball, ball, boo-doo-doo, you know, like Take the A Train, that kind of, you know, everyone has probably heard that before because it's from a famous jazz recording. So there's tons of endings kind of like that, but also you can just make up your own thing. You can like sort of just play around on like 1625, for example. I don't know, this is getting a little bit into the technical side of it, but
you lost me at 1/6. So.
Yeah. Me too, buddy. But yeah, it's cool because the only thing that's really going to be agreed upon is probably the melody. But even then, sometimes people play melodies with, you know, certain different notes. Even people will play the chord changes to a song differently from one person to the next. And there's all kinds of different ways you can change it. And but yeah, that's like the simple side of it. You play the melody, people take solos, you play the melody again, you end it somehow.
So it's like they kind of say jazz is always rewriting in a way. That's kind of what I've heard about it. I mean, I've obviously seen the film La La Land, and that's a really, really good film.
I actually haven't seen it.
Oh, well, it is a good film.
I know people keep telling me to see it, but I sometimes refrain from watching movies about jazz or that have jazz in them because I watched Whiplash, and as a jazz musician myself, it really hurt me.
Did it? What was it about it? Just it was too close to home, or it was just
there were just some really subtle things, like actors who are like clearly not playing the instruments that they are holding, and like the guy, I can't remember the main actor's name, but his way of conducting was like really weird, and I don't think anyone would actually.
J.K. Simmons.
Yeah, J.K. Simmons.
Yeah.
I mean, from an acting standpoint, I thought he did a great job.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were just some things that were like, wow, I don't think anyone would actually conduct a rehearsal this way. But there are definitely like crazy dudes who would probably throw a chair at someone in rehearsal. So, I mean,
apparently
personally,
that was real. The director, Damien Chazelle's his name. He wrote it as well. He said that J.K. Simmons' character is based on an actual character, like a real life person he knew. And, you know, things like throwing the chair. Yeah, well, I mean, I totally believe it at the same time, like you were saying. Yeah. Especially when it's so high. I mean, it is high stakes, I guess, to him as well. You know, it's definitely high stakes. It's obviously not life or death. Music. Well, maybe some ways music is. I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is like the pressure that he had of performing, it's just unreal, because the drummer in the actual film Whiplash is the director. It's kind of like this voyeuristic thing. Where
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Wow. So I appreciate it from that standpoint of film. I wouldn't obviously have picked up on those like subtleties, but La La Land is a step up from Whiplash in my opinion. It's a film to jazz music. It's like an ode to jazz music, but it's really a film like an ode to filmmaking itself. So it harkens back to the Hollywood golden age of cinema and that kind of thing, and I just got completely lost in it. So if you get the chance, Ben,
I will. Yeah, I do need to check it out because I like to be current on all of the popular movies.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. It's probably got a few cool standards in it as well, jazz standards.
Oh, I'm sure.
There you go.
Sure.
So then, I mean, like, why I mentioned earlier that it was a segue is because what it basically leads on to now is that was probably your best overnight on ships. But we haven't really spoken about cruise ships in general, because that's how we met everybody who doesn't know us, who's listening. Me and Ben, we met on the Queen Elizabeth in 2018. It would have been like November 2018, because that's when I joined. You were already on board the ship, and I joined just after the ship was in dry dock, which for those who don't know, the ship is it is literally dry dock, so there's no water around it. Yeah. It's like suspended in this harbour, or whatever you call it, this massive facility where they paint underneath it and fix the propellers and whatnot. So that's
weird renovations.
Yeah, exactly. So I joined just after the ship had all been renovated. So for me, it was like literally all brand new. To you, maybe it was a little bit different, but not too different.
Yeah.
But those were the circumstances how we met. And we had mutual friends, obviously, in common at first, like you said. He knew the photographers anyway, so a shout out here goes to Siobhan. She says Siobhan. And yeah, so basically, what I guess I gather that you're not going back to cruise ships. Is that correct?
Definitely not.
Definitely. Well, there you go. So then,
definitively, Sam, it's a no from me.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that's your final answer.
Yeah.
But I mean, so then, good. I mean, that gives this question even more credence. I mean, what is it about cruise ships then? Let's start with why you chose to quit. Or I mean, before we even contextualize what cruise ships life is like to everybody who's maybe not familiar with it or listening to it. I guess throughout this answer we might speak on that anyway. But yeah, as you're about to say, what kind of led to that firm no?
Well, great question. First, I want to say it's a pleasure to be talking with you, someone who has worked on cruise ships, about this, because personally I find it to be really exhausting sometimes when I would come back from a cruise ship and people would ask me all these questions about what it's like, and it's really difficult to explain. I think it's kind of impossible actually to explain fully what it is really like. And sometimes it can feel like a little bit isolating because there's this way of life that it's like so hard to convey, like the challenges, but also the joys. And people just kind of want to say like, oh my God, you've been everywhere. That's amazing. Did you have the best time? And you kind of like feel obligated to say, yes, I had the best time.
Otherwise they look so disappointed.
Yeah. I went back and forth. I tried to explain to people like the various challenges and some of the reasons that I didn't like it some of the time. And, I just kind of would talk about the good times because I think ultimately people don't want to hear about why it might not be the most fun thing. I'm sorry. I've totally forgotten what the actual question was. I'm going to get to that now.
No, I mean, had you actually forgotten, or do you want to remind?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, could you repeat the question?
Well, it's not so much a question as just a push in the realms of deeper conversation. But it's what made you it's what made you want to quit? Because personally, my point on this at the moment, especially. I don't know where I stand, if I want to go back, if I don't want to go back. Right now, I really miss it. I'll maybe speak in a moment why, but what is it then about you that has led to that position that you're happier on land now? Because like you said, it's maybe been hard to tell people why up until now. And you're talking to me now, Ben. I completely understand. So
I'm laid on you, Sam.
I'm ready. I'm strapped in.
Well, when I first applied for the cruise gig, it was I was always planning on it just being a gap year. I only expected to do it for 1 year, and then I planned to continue my studies and do my master's. So that's kind of it, really. I mean, maybe we'll get into this in a little bit after I hear what you have to say, but that was kind of always my plan, and I ended up doing a little over 1.5 years rather than 1 because I got some nice contracts with some nice world cruise itineraries on there, so I decided, what the hell, I'll do it a little bit more, I wouldn't say I wouldn't I wouldn't recommend working on a ship necessarily, but I do think that it was a really good learning experience. There were so many things that I had assumed about the world and how people worked and how working with other musicians is. There were so many things that I assumed that turned out not to be right. And I learned a lot of valuable lessons, like how to work with people who are really difficult in your field, which is something that's pretty unusual for me coming from a jazz perspective, because I've had, despite what Whiplash conveyed, I've had mostly really chill experiences with jazz musicians. Part of this is because I'm a man and there's like some really prevalent sexism in jazz, but a male jazz player will probably have a pretty laid back experience in the music, like most of the time. Like I show up to a bandstand and people assume that I can play. And and you know,
I'd never have thought of that, honestly, until you mentioned.
Yeah, it's something that I've become more aware of in the last year. But yeah, I mean, there were some really difficult people to work with on the ship. Like the amount of times, so I worked in the theater for like a total of 8 months, and then I worked in the dance band for a total of 8 months as well. And in the theater, it was a really frustrating experience because there were a lot of people who were difficult to work with, would be like kind of yelling in rehearsals, really for no reason. It was weird. Like there were some real tensions. And wow. But that kind of depends on the band that you get assigned with. So just for the people who are listening who don't know, the way musicians are hired on cruise ships are all in complete bands, but it's not a band of people who know each other. It's just the talent agency will hire an entire band, and you get on the ship and you leave the ship at the same time. So it's not like musicians on a rotating basis. And so you get on the ship and you meet these people, and you're going to spend the next 4 months with them every single day, 4 hours a day. And I mean more than 4 hours a day, because you're going to live with one of them. Yeah. And you're going to have lunch with all of them probably, and dinner, you know, or near them. So there's like this whole dynamic with learning how to work with people and also live with people in a really unusual social environment.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've just hit the nail on the head why some people then might want to quit, because it really comes down to, as with anything in life, it comes down to who you're with, really.
Definitely.
The most banal, mundane job in the world could be the best job in the world if it's with the best people. Conversely, a lot of people would see, the gig on cruise ships, traveling the world, as the best job, but those people wouldn't understand what you just outlined, how you're in this quite high pressure, like melting pot of emotions. That's what a cruise ship is. I'd say it's you experience the best things, and I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say the worst things by any stretch, but you then experience a lot of drama, because it's just, you can find, for 7 days at sea at a time. My personal record's 14 days. Doesn't go anything close to the people who have, been quarantined on the ship at this current time.
Yeah.
But those circumstances, definitely, like, especially because you're working with them as well, it just, anything that isn't a big deal gets completely blown out of proportion, because there's so many other underlying issues, which could be, I can't get the food ever that I want in the mess, and that could be just grating on someone until it just comes out in a different way, completely unrelated to the problem. Or it could be like, the musical director, your manager or whatever, giving you a hard time, or it could be the fact that your IPM on your favorite port, and you've been looking forward to that port ever since the itinerary had been announced. And
could be your roommate has like a girlfriend and doesn't let you in the cabin ever.
Oh my God. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. We had an interesting system, because we had this green magnet, and
I remember the green magnet.
Oh, you do? Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I mean, Jaden, if you're listening, we're on about my friend Jaden Roosh, who was in the last episode of this podcast, funnily enough. And every time I'd come back to the cabin and see this like little green magnet just staring back at me, denying entry, I'd just then have to, just sit in the staff mess, get a box of Frosties, just sat there. literally, I just sat there because the coffee machine wouldn't even be on. So I just sit there with a glass of water and a box of Frosties and wait for Jaden to have the best time of his life. And then, and then I could come down and...
That's so funny, man.
Yeah.
That's actually a perfect segue that you're talking about, like the coffee maker. There are so many like unexpected challenges on the ship. And like that so you're saying, why did I choose to quit? I'm surprised I didn't quit in my first contract, actually, because I hated it for like a month. I was absolutely infuriated because like, I mean, I had just come out of studying music in a really serious way, and I was expecting to like get on the ship and work with some really incredible musicians. And no offense to musicians who are working on cruise ships, but there are a lot of older musicians who are just there because they got the gig like 20 years ago, and you know, they're just doing it for the paycheck. They don't care. Like nobody was trying to like make it very musical, it seemed. And there was also this, like, this was completely unexpected to me, but there's nowhere to practice. Like I would practice in the dressing room, and that was what you were quote unquote supposed to do, was practice in the dressing room, which A, feels creepy if you're a brand new like 22-year-old on the ship and you've never worked with dancers before. B, there could only be one person practicing in there at a time, and there's like probably 20 musicians on the ship total.
Yeah.
And, you know, so we would try to find these like weird little alcoves. I remember I practiced in this little space where I literally had to duck just to not hit my head on something in case the ship moved. But it was actually the best place to practice on the ship because usually they couldn't hear you, you know, wherever you were. So I didn't like it for that reason. But also we couldn't, you couldn't get musicians together to just have a jam. We ended up finding a way and a room and enough musicians, but those are like the stars have to align. You have to like find enough musicians who are on the ship who actually care enough about music still to have a jam. And then you also have to find like a time and place where you're not going to get like shut down. And it was so like draining on me to be playing this kind of music that was along to a click track that we played in the theater. So it was not very rewarding because, you know, I was playing these really hard woodwind parts, and I would hear those same woodwind parts in my headphones from the track.
So is that why you're wearing the headphones? Because I've always wondered that, watching the Royal Court Theatre shows, and you've all got headphones on. I just assumed that you had someone on like the sound engineer like at the back of the room saying stuff.
Oh man, I wish.
Oh wow!
I wish I could hear the sound engineers actually, but yeah, it's literally just a constant metronome. So
that's mad.
The show can be the same every time. It has to be like the same amount of time, and there's like certain cues for the dancers and everything, and there's no conductor.
Oh
so
yeah,
since there's no conductor, they have to have a click track, and you know. But it was there were a lot of reasons. It was not musically fulfilling, so that's when. You know, I had a friend, Sarah, who really helped me to look at life in a different way. I owe a lot to her because she told me, like, I mean, suck it up. Like, who cares if it sucks? Like, you have to find other ways to do the things that are fulfilling for yourself. Like, there's no place to practice. Well, you can find somewhere. It's not going to be your practice room that you're used to in uni, but... you know, you can find a place. And if you want to have a jam, you can ask people. I'm sure there's 3 people on the ship who would want to play tunes. And it turns out that there were.
Yeah. Now, and I bet some of them weren't even quote unquote musicians. They just were really talented, self-taught, maybe musicians. There were a lot of them, I found. And they'd always surprise you. Like some of the people you'd least expect to have that musical capability, then just out of nowhere, boom, you know, pulled out a guitar one day and started singing. Like the guy who surprised me maybe the most, you'd have met him, James Clutterbuck.
I actually didn't meet him, but I heard.
Oh right. Because I'm not, you know, I never, you know, was close friends with him at all. But I remember one night in the crew bar, and he's a stage tech, and he just had this amazing voice, like the crew karaoke or the crew band night, which are amazing on board. If you ever work on board ships, those are my favourite nights at the crew bar. And yeah, amazing voice. Turns out he can play guitar as well. I mean, it makes sense now why he's, in the production team, stage tech. It's, quite similar. But there's a lot of examples like that. And it's so nice to see all these different people and how they surprise you in so many ways. And then you start to realise that everybody's the same, really. Doesn't matter where they're from at all.
Yeah.
It's, similar to like how we started this podcast in a way. There shouldn't be such a thing as racism, because you find out in such a melting pot of not emotions, but if it's the right way to use this term, but a melting pot of nationalities, if you know what I mean. It's you just realise that everybody is the same, even when they're speaking a different language. Like just watching people from the Philippines speak Tagalog, I don't have an actual idea what they're saying, but from their intonation and the way they say things, I actually gather the conversation because they still speak the same. It's just mad how you discover that and find that. So I know we're going completely off topic there, but that is one of, if not the biggest benefit of working on board a cruise ship, is you experience that, which I've just outlined really.
I agree.
Plus you get to see those, the different places. But but yeah.
Yeah, I remember being so blown away by how many people from different countries there were. I also remember being incredibly confused by British accents.
Really? Well, there's so many. That's the thing. I've only realised that by meeting people who aren't from Britain. And, people who aren't British didn't think I was British when they first spoke to me, because my accent's not that prominent, honestly.
It's pretty neutral.
You should hear someone from Liverpool if you haven't. Have you heard someone from Liverpool?
Liverpool.
Oh my God.
That's terrible.
Liverpool. I can't do it. It's not. I mean, some people love it. I personally hate the accent. I don't hate people from Liverpool. Just hate the accent. But then
I think it's so funny. Like sometimes people, I don't know. I worked with this one person from Liverpool who, her accent was a little strange, but the thing that was the most strange to me was that she always ended her sentences with an upwards inflection. So it was like, I was never sure. Are you asking me a question? Are you insulting me? Probably. Are you, Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's confusing. I know someone who has that similar thing. They're from Liverpool, and speaking to them, it is a disconcerting thing because you're never quite sure where you stand. I guess it's hard. But then there's other accents like Cockney and Yorkshire. And you're from Manchester area, right?
Yeah. So Leeds is the exact city I was born in. So that's actually Yorkshire. It's in the county of Yorkshire. Sure. It's like not proper Yorkshire. People would say it's actually closer to Manchester, I think, than the heart of Yorkshire. But northwest England. So what you're hearing now is a fairly nondescript, neutral northern accent. But yeah, I can completely relate why you'd be surprised at all the accents. I mean, because from a British perspective, the American accents, there's 3 that people think of. There's the New York. Hey, sure. I'm walking here. I'm walking here. And then
that's pretty good.
Yeah, well, honestly, I'm ashamed to say I practice that a bit. and then there's the deep south. So I can't really do that.
Oh, let's hear it.
That's funny.
Can you try?
Let me just think of something to say. Deep south. There's a snake in my boot. That was a Toy Story 2. Yeah. But,
oh my God, that's actually not that bad. That one sentence. I'm from Texas, so sometimes I could just turn it on if I want to.
There you go.
I'll just be like, "Ooh, doggy, let me get my truck out of the shop and fix her on up."
That's a proper Southern drawl. That is.
There's all kinds of different accents. I could do like a Southern gentleman accent, like from Savannah, Georgia, or
that's the one I'm familiar
sometimes you get like bit of a twang to it. Get that thing on over there. Get that boom barrel tic tac.
So there's there's more than 3 accents then, but I only and the other third accent, by the way, was that just general Californian accent where they say, I do it myself, but where they say like a lot, like this, that, the other, like the Kardashians. I just think that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's funny though, that you don't have that Texan drawl to your voice. Is that something you've actually purposely tried to get out of your accent, or has it just happened? Or?
It's interesting actually. I grew up in suburban Dallas area, specifically Plano, Texas, and I personally can count on one hand the number of people who I know from my childhood who actually do have a discernible Texas accent. It's like, I think in the cities and suburbs, it's like the accents are just approaching neutrality. I mean, also both of my parents are not from Texas.
Well, that makes sense.
So that'll do it, really. But it was so funny because I remember even in Texas, weirdly enough, if you had like a thick Southern accent as a kid, you'd get made fun of it for. You get made fun of for it, and it's like, what? We're in Texas. This is like this one guy I went to school with. My people made fun of him relentlessly because he had a really thick accent. He like worked on a farm and everything, which was weird because we didn't really have very many farms where I grew up either. It was, I mean, really, really suburban, just like a bunch of houses, gigantic roads, the suburban Texas life. But yeah, everyone made fun of him for it. And looking back on it, that was foolish of us.
Well, you don't know at that age, do you, for one thing, But
yeah, kids are kind of dumb and mean.
Yeah, I mean, I got made not fun of, especially for my accent, but I got told I sounded posh, which is funny because then when I went to university down in the southern of England, I then got told I sounded really, really northern. So there was that kind of weird, like, I couldn't really be placed because my dad's from London, so that then had a lot to do with it, I think, as well. Kind of, straightened me out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, just going back then briefly to cruise ships then as a whole, you were on about then the way you described being disappointed when you first got on board about not having those serious musicians and all that. It was really funny because what you described there is basically what led me towards the end of my last contract to feel like I was through with cruise ships, but you had that same feeling at the beginning of your contract, partly because you were a much more advanced musician just starting ships than I was a photographer starting ships, because I started ships and as a portrait studio photographer, event photographer, employed to work on board, I hadn't used a flash in my entire life. So, I mean, like,
no way.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
And I don't know how I got the job, honestly, but it turns out really you don't need to be that good at photography to be a photographer on board cruise ships. So that's how I got the job. But you learn so much so quickly. So that's really what sustained me for my first, second, third contract. But by then, so you're talking a year of the job, by then I'd really felt like on cruise ships especially, the photography is limited. It has to be. There's you know, you can't do too much really.
You can't get too artsy with your pictures of people with the captain. Exactly,
yeah. And plus every guest, really, no offense to them, they all look the same, more or less. You find that passion to take portraiture of people gets completely ground out of you by sheer attrition of taking literally thousands of pictures a day for a year, for 2 years in my case. Yeah. And it got so, like you probably felt at the beginning, I don't know, like this creative bottleneck where you had to do what you like in the way the ship wants you to. And that's really what has led me now ultimately to leave ships, because I actually told myself, I had a quiet word with myself before leaving to go off to ships. And I said to myself, Sam, if this job ever becomes just about the travel, it's time to quit. Yeah. I told myself that 2 years ago at the age of 22. And I think I've stood by that, because the point being is if cruise ships just becomes about the travel, if it just becomes about what the people at home think it is, then there's no point in being there, is what I personally believe. because it's not actually traveling when you're on board, for one.
Sure.
It's half the time, it's literally finding Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
or just the amount of time in port I've spent just walking around listening to a podcast, not really doing anything, just walking around a new place or stuff like that. You can do those things wherever, you know. So traveling, it's not exactly traveling. And the other thing is, it's kind of becomes a crux, or, you know, like a safety net where you can escape the real world and not really confront the problems. You're safe on ships because everything's really taken care of.
For sure.
You know, your heading in life is literally set because it's, you know, the bridge do it for you.
You have nothing to decide. Like, your schedule is decided for you. Your meals, much to the disappointment of mostly everyone on board, is decided for you.
Yeah.
You know, even your time zone. You know, put your clock back an hour. Your time zone is decided for you.
Oh my God, that's something I'd even forgotten about. All the clock changes, yeah. And it just, that really was it for me. I thought, really, you know, it's become that now, Sam. It's just about the travel, and that's not going to last forever. Because this is the thing that we've both seen and people won't realise. You see those people on board, you know, those officers or whatever, who have been doing the job, like you were saying about those musicians, for 10, 20 years. And they're doing it because you can see it so clearly. On board, there's someone. But in life, maybe in real life, they are obviously someone as well. And I'm not going to say that everybody doesn't have that fulfillment. But personally, if I saw myself as that, you know, it would make me think that you're in this like other reality, this microcosm where, you know, little things like, God, all these rules that don't care, that no one would care about anywhere else, like your uniform on land to public areas, all these little things like that. Oh, I can't even think, you know, remember there's so many, but they matter on board. And if you're the person that enforces those kind of rules, that makes you someone, you know. Right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. And there's various types of people who've been doing ships for a long time. There's people, I think, who got comfortable with it because it's something where they feel important. They've gotten used to the lifestyle. And I mean, no shame. It's like, if you like doing it, then that's great. If you like genuinely enjoy your life on a ship and, you know, you feel like that's a healthy thing for you, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, just on that point, you see people on board, like the engineers or officers or other people that have that kind of craft or trade, then it, you know, obviously that you can totally understand and makes sense. That's your career there.
Sure.
But I guess we're on about a slightly different kind of person.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this taps into one of the reasons that I got out sooner rather than later. And with musicians, and possibly I could definitely see this translating to photography as well.
Yep, absolutely.
There's certain like connections that you need to make on land in order to make your living. If you're going to make your living like that, freelancing, taking photos, making music, you have to build your connections. And I mean, also it's important to make friends with other people who are in your craft. And, you know, one contract on a ship, 4 months, 6 months, that's a long time to be away from those people. And people forget really easily. I know when I went out on the ship, you know, I came back after 4 months and no one was calling me for anything. I didn't play music in public at all. Like, except, I mean, there were a few public jam sessions, but, you know, people just saw like, oh, he's on a cruise ship. So that's it. You know, it's like you're gone. And it's really hard. You have to try really hard to be present in like a scene and insert yourself into the scene by going to stuff, like going to shows or, you know, having some kind of a presence. And when you're on the ship, you just kind of, you know, you're losing those connections and that presence. So it's really hard to get your livelihood back off the ground when you come back. I think that's why a lot of people end up coming back so soon after leaving a ship. That's why there's that whole joke like, oh, this is my last contract, I swear.
Yeah, I actually said that during my second contract, I said that, and I ended up doing 5. So it happens, yeah.
It's definitely a thing, man, and it's it's easy money. It's like it's like hitting pause on your life.
That's it. Yeah.
And cool. Yeah, I mean, definitely right now I'm kind of wistful for all those days, like exploring random places. Like I'd love to get off a cruise ship and be in Croatia right now. But that's only because I just want to escape how crazy things are in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the only reason why I really miss it as well, was because literally lockdown especially has really made me, like a lot of people in the world, really sit down and look themselves in the eye and be like, okay, what are you doing with your life? And cruise ships is a nice way to escape that. But if you're not careful, then life can pass you by very quickly as well, like you were saying. So
right.
It's something you have to weigh up. In photography, there was a saying on board, 2 years, you either move up or you move out. And it's a very weird, is a very surprisingly accurate sort of description, because that's what you see. I mean, for me, it was 2 years and I've moved out. And it was a very natural sort of turning a point 2 years later, because I guess there's just enough of a contract, so there's just enough amount of time, and you've seen just the right amount of places in the world. For me, the last contract I got offered before coronavirus put a pause to everything, I'd done every single port on that itinerary already. So it kind of got to that point where, well, Sam, you've done all these places, that's kind of a sign. Even though Alaska's amazing, we've both been there, haven't we? And I'd love to go back one day, but that was kind of a sign. And so if you ever do work on cruise ships, anyone listening, if you find yourself getting to that 2 year mark, you probably have those same feelings of, you've got to really ask yourself, do I love what I do on board, or am I running away from, am I running away from my problems on land, I guess. So, on that note, Ben, what do you miss the most about cruise ship? Because, I mean, what I like to ask people now are these kind of generic questions you'll be asked a lot by your friends, maybe, but it's just interesting to know.
Sure.
Still. What was your favorite port? Like, if you could, would it be Croatia? I mean, because if you could go anywhere tomorrow that you've been to on board ships already, where would you just go to in an instant?
I could go anywhere. This is always the hardest question because there's so many good places. I think I would go to Japan.
Oh, I forgot you went there. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
I would probably go to Osaka in Japan. That was definitely one of my favorite ports to go to, favorite countries in general. It's pretty easy for me to say Japan was like much more fun than a lot of the places that I went on the cruise. It's just like, I mean, it's fun for me because their culture is like totally different than the one that I grew up in. And that's so exciting. And I had a lot of fun. We had like 3 or 4 weeks of Japanese ports on the last contract that I did, which was crazy. It was so much time. I had the most fun, like learning, little tidbits of Japanese, like for ordering food and asking where the bathroom is.
Where's the bathroom, Ben?
Oh God, I forgot. Oh man, I remember how to order coffee. It's
that's
if you want. Yeah. It's funny because some of the words sound like really, really similar. You'd be like, coffee.
Oh right, yeah.
Ohitotsu kudasai. That's like 1 coffee, please.
That's basically all you need then, really.
Yeah, that's all I needed because that's pretty much all I did was just go drink coffee. And oh man, I actually have a really good story about Osaka.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so I was in Osaka doing some shopping, and I was at this shopping mall that had a lot of posh stores in it, Calvin Klein, that kind of thing.
How are you?
And it was one of the first ports I had been to. That's your last name. That's hilarious. I see you approve of that, Brand.
I certainly do.
Yeah, it was one of the first ports I'd been to in Japan, so I didn't have a grasp of the currency yet. I think it's like 100 to 1 yen to US dollars, so basically you just move the decimal over 2 places, I believe. I could be wrong. But that day I was definitely wrong about it, and I moved the decimal over 1 place too many, so I picked up a pair of Calvin Klein underwear, and it was like, I thought it was $4.50 when in reality it was $45.
Whoa.
But
yeah.
I refrained from buying anything until I saw some trousers for our UK listeners.
It's very considerate.
I needed some smart trousers for our boat drill. So I needed to look nicer because I kept on wearing these like red jeans, and then my boss got on my case for it because you're not supposed to wear jeans. Anyway, so I was like trying to get these pants. They fit amazing. The guy spoke no English. We got through the whole transaction on Google Translate. I had to actually get them tailored, and I was like, I have to leave today at this time. And he was so nice about it. He had the pants ready for me to go, right in time for me to get back to the ship. I put the pants on. They felt amazing. I was feeling fresh and fine at boat drill. And I then checked my bank account the next day and realized that I had spent over $300 on a pair of pants.
Oh, man. Oh.
And I was freaking out, but luckily we actually had Osaka again the next week. And I somehow found that shop again, even though I didn't mark it on my map. I found the shop again and returned the pants, even though I felt really bad about it. The guy who worked there was so apologetic, and the Japanese hospitality culture is so real. Like, he apologized to me. I just said I need to return these pants, and I was trying to explain, but he wasn't listening to what I was trying to explain. He was just like apologizing and bowing, and I felt so bad. He was like, "Sumimasen," and I was like, "No, I'm sorry." So yeah, that's the story of the $300 trousers.
I mean, at least so you got your money back, basically.
I did get my money back.
Good,
I felt really bad about it, but at the end of the day, I think there's a threshold to my.
Oh yeah.
I think I would spend like $100 maybe on a pair of pants if they were like really nice. Yeah. But
the most I've ever spent on a personal like garment is £120. And I only remember that so specifically is because I remember at the time of the transaction thinking, this is my limit now for the rest of my life, £120.
I will never spend more than £120.
Yeah, on a single garment. So like maybe a suit.
What was
like
it?
It was pair of, what would you call shoes, garments actually? Is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, they were a pair of my work boots for ships actually.
Oh, nice.
I decided to invest in a really good pair of footwear for 2 years of standing up for literally 14 hours a day for 2 years. I have never had a bad back or bad knees or anything like that because I've always I chose the best pair of shoes I could have, and I'm proud. One of literally one of the top 5 purchases of my life with those shoes. They are. I can show you them right now. Not that I know it's a podcast, but
you can show them to me and I'll describe them for your listeners.
I mean, you'd have seen me on them on board, but it's like in the Shawshank Redemption.
Oh yeah. Oh, those are.
You don't notice a man's pair of shoes, but there they are.
Those are well smart.
They're well
proper. Yeah. So they're black. They're kind of they're a chukka boot, so it goes up to the ankle, lace up, cap. Is that a cap toe? What kind of toe is that? I used to work at a suit shop, so I'm.
It's what would you call a cap toe?
A cap toe, yeah. It's kind of like a straight line that goes horizontally across the toe.
You tell me.
Oh yeah, that's a cap toe.
Yeah, it's a cap toe. Yeah,
it looks like they just kind of put a little cap on the front of the shoe.
Yeah,
those look nice, man.
I mean, yeah, and very comfortable as it turns out. So, a fun fact though, I've only worn these shoes on board cruise ships.
Really?
So I've never worn them. Besides, like when I tried them on at the store. I mean,
sure.
But I've never worn them on land. They have always been worn on a.
You never
ship.
like went out in port with them on?
No, because they're not very like. I mean, maybe they are, but they're not like for jeans. I don't know. They're just not like comfortable footwear. They're like, for me, they were my work boots, and even now I've still not worn them because I don't know. There's something kind of like, I don't know. I've really grown attached. Do you ever find you get attached to inanimate objects?
Yeah. I totally have the same thing. I have this pair of Tux shoes that I only wore on board as well.
Were they the white and black ones?
Yeah, they were the black and white ones.
I always thought, damn, he looks good.
That's so funny. Those shoes are so cheap. You can get them on Amazon for like $30 and they feel terrible. It's like, they feel so bad. They feel like plastic. But they look really good. They're like patent leather, I think people would call them spats is like a name for them. But yeah.
I mean, you look the part in them for sure. I remember thinking, like, Ben has always turned out on formal night because of those shoes. So,
yeah, I used to work at a suit shop, Men's Warehouse in Texas for like a year. And I learned so much about how to wear a suit, how to wear a tuxedo, you know. I learned how to tie a bow tie. And
I remember you had that. And I remember you saying in the wardroom one time, I love learning to tie a bow tie because... like an actual bow tie, because then when you unwind in the evening, you can then unwind the bow tie and just look so...
Yeah, it's the best look ever. Like black suspenders, white tuxedo shirt, your black bow tie just hanging down there by the ends, you know?
But nothing says I'm ready to socialize now like a bow tie undone around someone's neck. Like,
absolutely.
That guy needs a gin and tonic as soon as possible.
Get that man a drink.
Is that another thing you perhaps missed the most on board? I mean, we covered favourite port. Mine, by the way, is Cape Town. And that's a fairly instant answer for me every time. Just a weird segue, by the way, just very quickly. If you ever find I interrupt you for whatever reason or I look confused, it's because there's a slight lag, very slight, and sometimes it confuses me a little bit. I'll edit out that little bit. But yeah, when you were telling the story about Osaka, I did hear it all, but there were little bits where I was like, shit, but I got it, everything. So don't worry.
Okay.
But if you ever find that, that's the only reason.
Gotcha.
But yeah, Cape Town. Because do you remember that overnight we had in Cape Town?
Yes. Oh. It was insane.
And that for me, that whole experience it was my first overnight on a ship for one thing.
Oh my God. It's all coming back to me. We went to like this crazy club called
Cubana.
like Fuego.
Cubana.
Cubana. Yeah. Siobhan like smoked some random dude's hookah. I have a video of that, I think. Sorry. You say shisha.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was an amazing evening. Partly because, I mean, do you remember that nightclub? And I mean, for me, that was my first experience of what it must be like to be a black person. And do you know where I'm coming from? Because that nightclub was filled with basically like, obviously like a completely different ethnicity to what we are, like Caucasian, you know. Yeah. It was completely, we were the 5 white people in the entire nightclub.
Yeah, it was awesome.
There was maybe like one other white girl who was Afrikaans that Siobhan started speaking to. But do you know what's funny is I didn't feel the slightest bit, what's the word, like under threat at all, ever. Like, and this is South Africa, mind you. So even my parents, when they knew I was going, they were like, "Oh, be careful." And
right.
Even
even other white South Africans will tell white people to be careful.
Yeah.
Which just kind of speaks to what the social dynamic is like.
Yeah. Well, obviously,
or perceived.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Like, I don't know much. My knowledge of apartheid isn't like encyclopedic, but obviously I'm aware of it, and so that's why I had tensions maybe at the thought of going there initially, but I don't know whether it's because I was drunk by that point because we'd been to the Irish bar first.
Oh, that's right.
But going into that nightclub with all my friends, but I just had the best time, and I still think of that as my favourite overnight ever. Partly because, just imagine this, like you wake up hungover and then climb Table Mountain. Like, that's just what you're going to do today. I'm going to go to one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's just, Cape Town has everything you could want. And I just completely gush every time someone asks me or doesn't ask me, in fact, to describe Cape Town. I'll describe it anyway, because you've been to Table Mountain, the top of it, yeah? Did you go?
I actually didn't.
Oh, Ben.
I regret it so much.
I'll describe it to you now. It's not that good, actually.
It's only the thing that I love most in the world.
Yeah, it's only been the single most, poignant moment of my entire life. No, but just standing at the top there, it's just looking down at the city bowl, and then you got Robben Island in the difference, and this perfect clear blue sky and water. And you just look at this, like, it's just so otherworldly, this city. And then surrounded by it, these ancient, like, landmarks and mountains surrounding it, like the Lion's Head and then the Lion's Paw. And it's just, wow. Oh my God, it's just, I really can't, I can't put into words, or words can't describe just the feeling of it. It's just, I miss it so much. And I've been up Table Mountain twice now, because I was fortunate to go back there again.
Oh, wow.
And if I went back to South Africa again, I'd go to Table Mountain. So if you ever go to South Africa, Ben, that'd be...
Oh, that would be amazing.
At the top of your list.
I'd be super down for it.
But yeah, I was actually meant to ask you, I was just about to ask you, do you miss the crew bar nights? Does that ever come into your mind as what do you miss most about cruise ships, the social aspect? Or do you find that, I don't know, I found a little bit that socially, yeah, some really good nights, but at the same time, I didn't really quite find my crowd. I didn't really find, when I went to the crew bar, I'd find some nights I'd literally ask myself, why am I here sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, it's not the thing that pops to my mind as something that I miss about cruise ships. But definitely the people. I mean, I wouldn't say like the crew bar specifically is something that I miss, because it's just a shitty bar. Yeah. It's like the only reason it was ever fun is if I was with people that were fun, and somehow it seemed every contract I had, I ended up in, a little group of people. It was always different every time, but somehow, I made like 3 or 4 friends that I was probably closest with, for the whole contract. And, it's always those people that I miss when I think back on it. Like my most recent contract, I was hanging out with Jack, Santi, and Esther, and they're all musicians in the dance band. And
yeah,
those are the people that come to my mind when I think about like the most recent social things that I miss. But yes, I mean, sometimes there is kind of a unique I'll say vibe.
It's a good word.
There's a unique vibe to the crew bar when it's fun. A lot of the times I found it to not be fun at all. But there is like something unique about being on a cruise ship and like partying with a bunch of people who work there, especially when like a lot of people have to go to work in the morning.
Yeah, and legally or would get fired if they were found to be hungover and breathalyzed, but are still there anyway. It's a weird dichotomy, that is.
Yeah, and the bar closes at like midnight, or was it 1? I can't remember.
It was midnight the day before. If it was a port day the next day, it was midnight, and then it was 1.
That's right.
If it was just a regular sea day. But you could, obviously everybody got their drinks in before that, and then carried on to the early morn quite often. So
I'll tell you one thing I do miss though. I miss playing foosball.
Yeah, well, I saw you play that a lot, and for what I gathered, you were quite good. But I
started out really bad, but I got better.
Well, there you go. Sure. Practice makes perfect.
Yeah,
that's a true underdog story right there. So that kind of then leads me on to another kind of big question, hard question. Of those people you've met, then, is there anything about yourself that other people have taught you about yourself? Because they say people are like mirrors, aren't they? So when you met all these people from around the world, and you've had all these different mirrors and all these different perspectives to look at, what then have you internalized about yourself based on that?
Wow, that's a really poignant way of putting it. I like that. yeah, I mean, you and I have both had tons of mirrors pointed back at us. It is always interesting because whether or not you get along with someone, you can always learn something about them and about yourself if you interact with them enough. I learned from some people who were hard to deal with that I can get along with difficult people because I'm, pretty gentle in my spirit.
I'd say gentle, but you're not a pushover at the same time. This is coming from a mirror right here for you. Like you are approachable is how I'd definitely describe it. But I wouldn't suspect in your life you've had many people take you for granted, have you?
It definitely happens. It's always a struggle for me to sort of stand up for myself. Just for regular things that are like not significant. I have a really hard time with like conflict and that kind of thing in general. I think that's probably the thing that I learned most about myself is that I am capable of standing up for myself for the important things. And I think that there's something really important to learn in life about figuring out what those important things are. If someone like comes up to me in the bar and is like belligerent and insults me, I'm gonna walk away because I don't care. Like I will never be in a bar fight because I don't care what a random drunk person thinks. Mm-hmm. But if it's like a thing that threatens someone's like actual well-being or is like objectively not how you're supposed to do something in your profession, those are some of the things. I mean, I can't even list out all the things that are important, but I guess a succinct way of putting it is choosing your battles.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing how you've learned how to narrow down what's worth fighting for, because what's that saying? If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, and
yeah.
If you don't know what's worth fighting for, then you can end up just fighting for any old goddamn reason, and that's never. You see that a lot, obviously. Just people with a chip on their shoulder. Personally, like I've never been in a bar fight. Not through. I mean, I've never tried to, obviously, but it's just at that same time, if someone at a random bar would say something that was really nasty and they're drunk, obviously, I still would find it hard to just, I don't know, walk away. I probably would, though, knowing me, but then I'd walk away and think about it for the next. Well, I still remember, I still have a real wound up anger about it. Just it's hard for me to let it go that someone just got away with that. Like, but then obviously when I think of it in your terms, like for example, I used to work at a bar, and there was one guy. He was 18. And I was 21, and I was like, I don't know, a lot more mature. And the reason why I'm saying this guy was like a squaddy, so like a UK slang for like army, like infantry guy.
Okay.
So just head shaved, drunk, really aggressive young man.
Sure.
And this I'm not trying to paint a negative picture of anyone in the armed forces, because I personally have like the utmost respect for them. And one of my biggest influences in life is a ex-military man. So he and his from what he preaches, he's the main reason why I started this podcast. So I'm not trying to say that, but this guy had a massive chip on his shoulder, and he said something along the lines of, "I'm going to glass him," and I was outside picking up glasses, and he wasn't on about me. It turns out he was on about my manager. But I turned around and looked at him and thought, "What?" And he looks at me like, "What's up?" And I said, "Did you just say you're going to glass my manager?" And then he goes up with a glass in his hand right towards my face, and I could smell like the alcohol on his breath. And he's quite a bit shorter than me, but in that moment, I just remember him being eye level, but he wasn't. I don't know what that says. But he was just looking at me and said like something along the lines of, "You fucking what, mate?" in the proper proper British way. And, he had his friends in the background and everything like that. And God, I am ashamed to say, when he did that, I kind of froze. I just didn't expect it. And I think of like everything I could have done in that moment. And because he was drunk and I wasn't. So that instantly gives me an infinite, better chance of anything. But I just froze up like that. I mean, what I'm trying to say is it just says a lot that you've kind of got over that insecurity of, it doesn't matter, you could brush that off fairly easily, I imagine. And maybe cruise ships wouldn't have led you to come to that conclusion anyway. You just seem that level-headed guy in life. That's your demeanor.
Well, I still am anxious about it, but like, I mean, you were saying how it would bother you and it would just be in your head. And I mean, it definitely would bother me and be in my head as well. But I would know that I've made the right choice. Like, I had a similar thing happen to me actually when I was working in university. I worked in my student union building, and we would have events in there, and I would kind of supervise and make sure the events went well and then lock up afterward, basically. And there was this military event going on where they were supposed to be honoring someone's life, and there was unfortunately a technical error during that. And the guy who was running the event was absolutely furious, and he yelled at the tech team. But this was one of the times where I thought that I'm going to stand up for, not for myself, but for these employees who were technically, under my supervision during that event. And, he like got in their faces and screamed at them in front of the entire event. And then they had to like keep on working the whole time in this really tense environment. And of course, it's like, it was a terrible mistake to have happened, but, ultimately it was a mistake. And so I went up there to confront him, which is like the scariest confrontation I've ever had. And he got in my face and yelled, and he threatened to like break me in half, I think was how he decided to word it.
Wow. Very eloquent.
And, he was like, I'll break your ass in half or something like that. I don't know. But it was crazy, man. But I just froze up as well and decided that I should not do anything except walk away and get the campus police involved. So it was like I stood up for myself, and then like I was very, very anxious about it the whole time. But I was like, no, this is an important one,
But so, think about it though. A lot of people wouldn't have had that, initiative to go and confront him anyway in the first place. So that says a lot. And it's like all comes down to, as you said, it's the best way of putting it, choosing your battles and knowing what matters and what doesn't. And once you figure that out, little instances like someone saying something to you in a bar and threatening to glass you, it's all smoke and, what's the saying? All smoke and no mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. So that's really what it is. And
wow, smoke and mirrors, that's full circle.
Exactly. I thought that and said, can it really be that that perfect? But
could I really have set it up that well?
Yeah. Turns out it was an accident, but I'll take it. And the sooner that I figure that out, the sooner that you figure that out in general, the happier life you live. So I'm glad you figured that out on board, man. That then leads me to perhaps maybe my final question, but I don't want to just say that and decide that this draws an end to this podcast. But I mean, if there's anything else you want to say afterwards, that you want to use this platform of, a few people to talk to that I might be listening, then you can go ahead. But what I like to ask people now, and I might have already kind of asked it already, and I think you might have already answered it, but I'll ask it again anyway. It's, what are you here to say, basically? You're Ben Kean, and you are here to what? And I mean on like planet Earth. Say if, like, for example, you were to die tomorrow, and what would you like your number one regret be that you haven't said? Or if you've said it already, what are you most pleased about that you've really brought to the world?
Man, that is very deep.
Because because and I only ask that because I think about that a lot, especially turning 25 soon, because a lot of people will have that milestone and like, shit, that's a quarter of a century. What have I done? And if you have that goal in mind, or if you know what you're doing and what you're trying to say, it makes it all that much more simple to, I think, be content with yourself and what you're doing, because it's always leading somewhere.
Sure.
And that's the only reason why I asked that, is because it's sometimes nice to either hear that people have got it figured out like that, or comforting to know that people haven't and they're still figuring that out. So either or is cool.
Yes. Okay, well, after this few seconds of gestating on this question, I have some insightful things to say, I think.
That's good.
The first one being that I am incredibly anxious. So, I just want to offer that to anyone who may be listening. I, on paper, am a professional musician and a teacher, and, by any measure, I've probably been leading a somewhat, quote unquote, successful life at what I do so far. But I constantly struggle with, sort of identity. I wouldn't say identity crisis from like an artistic standpoint, but it is always difficult to try and nail down what it is that I want to put out into the world. And to help me with that, I try and just give myself short-term goals. These poem orchestrations that I was talking about, I put out my first one actually as a podcast, funnily enough.
I should have listened to that. I need to listen to that as soon as we finish recording. I will listen to that.
It's called Peachy Poetry, and it's Peachy, right. As in Peachy Keen, because of my last name, Peachy Poetry. It's very short, and I put it out there because I'm the type of creative person who needs to be pushed in some way to actually finish something. So I'm the worst. I'm a chronic starter, and I am almost never a finisher. So I put it out there as if to say this. So it's just a minute-long orchestration, and I'm gonna put out just a little bit of a blurb before and after. I've got my theme song and everything. Anyway, so that's on a more like realistic, tangible level. That's something that I do. I mean, I've written down some goals in 2020 to help keep me on track for not necessarily what I want to say. I'm not exactly the most verbose. But
just for me, verbose. Just define that again. What would that be?
Verbose meaning to use lots of words, I guess.
Well,
so
I think when you do use them,
verbose.
But when you do use them, Ben, you're very you use words wisely. For example, you use the word verbose in anyway. So I think that says a lot. I might have a few words, but when he says them, they matter.
Well, I appreciate that. I definitely have always kind of strived to be that kind of person. It also is sort of out of necessity because I don't really think of words that quickly. But yeah, sort of on a more serious note though, the things in life that are hard, which like right now kind of seems to be everything. And that's me saying from a place of privilege, even, that my life is difficult and upsetting right now. And to do anything that's fulfilling is remarkable. And I think it's important to give ourselves credit and give other people credit as well for putting things out there that are meaningful. And I don't know, I don't want to get like too personal, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Screw it. It's a podcast, right? So when I was 12 years old, my dad died, and I was put in a really awkward position of having to be like my own caregiver, kind of. I had two older brothers, but our whole entire family was just grieving so completely, and I was just like in school during this time. And this was a really important time in my life because having a mortality awareness from a young age has kind of taught me that the really important things are the relationships in your life. And, you can do all of the stuff that you want in your life that's artistically fulfilling, and you should. But at the end of your life, you're going to want those people around you. I was saying before, when I perform, I want those people who are important to be near me, because I want to show the people who are important to me, I want to just pour out my essence, my personality, whatever it happens to be at that time. I want to show the most authentic version of myself and just give that to the people that I love. And I guess I'd never know what I want to say, but I know who I want to hear it.
That has helped me a lot, honestly. I know like a lot of people listening will definitely appreciate you sharing that.
Well, I hope so.
I just think that's amazing because I really haven't ever thought of it like that. Like, because I asked people that question, and maybe you're right. Like, it doesn't really matter what you're here to say, but as long as you've got those good people around to hear it, you could say what you want. Because maybe that's what's wrong. Like, those people who spend their life thinking they've got to output something.
Sure.
But really, that doesn't matter. It's who's there. Well, that's very poignant. I mean, honestly, thank you for like just sharing that, because I know that's got to be very personal.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, like that's something certainly like we've never even talked about in the time that we known each other even. So it's just the thing about long form discussions like this, like podcasts. I saw a funny meme the other day actually, and it was saying how podcasts have become men's way of just having a long catch up, like their excuse for it, which is honestly maybe even a bit kind of true. But it's it's just hearing that and hearing your story and everything you talked about and your like perspective on things. It's sad really that I didn't know about that kind of during my first contract. If we'd had this conversation, Ben, honestly, during my first contract, I think a lot of things would have been different for me. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but that outlook you've just said then about it doesn't really matter what you're trying to say. It's very that's heavy. That's kind of struck me by surprise. So that's interesting. But I guess these conversations and things like this, you don't have that luxury of timing when they are. They just happen organically. So the fact that they happen at all is amazing.
Yeah. No, that's really funny about the men having a long catch up thing. That's really funny. That's definitely what's going on here. But
yeah,
it's a good format because there's so much like swirling around in my head all the time, and I find it really helpful to be talking with you. You actually inspired me to put my orchestrations out there. I didn't have my podcast out until I saw that you had one, and I listened, and I was like, dude, this is awesome. I got to put something out there. I'm hopping on the podcast bandwagon.
Hey, that means a lot. That you identified with that as well, because I guess that's also something nice to like kind of leave in your wake as a person, a bit of inspiration, no matter how big the wake is and whatever. It's a nice feeling to have for sure. So you're obviously like a lot worldlier person, a lot wiser for the life you've led and everything leading up to that. So it's been nice, obviously, having this discussion and talking about all the things we have. I'm sure I'll listen back to it now, like probably two or three times more, 4 times more, maybe in 10 years' time. That's the luxury now. We've got it recorded. So.
Yeah, that's the nice thing.
Yeah,
I'll definitely enjoy listening back to this many times, and especially in the future to hear how the two of us were thinking. I mean, people just change so much, and especially I think you and I are both like a similar creative type, and you know, I'm sort of like, I'm always seeking that inspiration, and you know, it's just always insightful to listen back and hear what was I inspired by during this time.
Yeah, that'd be trippy. That'd be a very trippy experience. You know, listen back to your past self, almost like time traveling in a way. And that's actually why I like photography in general. It gives you that ability. I mean, this is the bottom line with photography for me. It defines a moment, and you can't argue with it because it's there. You know, it's especially documentary style, photojournalistic style, because you're not allowed to infringe with the photo. I mean, sure, in a lot of pictures they could be staged or edited afterwards, but the beauty of it is, and the purest form, is defines a moment, and I like things that do that. So I mean, honestly, thank you for all your time and, you know, having this, you know, discussion. And I mean, is there anything else you wanted to cover, to say? Because, you know, it's quite a cathartic experience to do so. And this is a podcast is a perfect excuse, like we've just mentioned.
I mean, it's we've been talking for like 2 hours. We might as well keep it going, right? Yeah.
Is it because there is a burning thing that you want to say, or anything that you felt like, you know, the worst feeling for me would be to like listen back to this conversation and think I didn't mention that and I wanted to. So if you got that now, go for it.
Well, I was thinking of this before we were talking about sort of quarantine and all of that. I suspect it's hard for a lot of people, but I didn't realize how hard it was for me being an introvert. Because like, I mean, I'm introverted in the sense that I sort of, to regain my energy, I like to be alone. And it's just been so long since I've been like truly alone, it feels. But right now I'm actually staying at my aunt's place in West Virginia. She's out of state helping her daughter. She's about to have a baby. So the house is empty. And I'm just in this house in rural West Virginia. The nearest people to me are like a half mile through some trees. There's like I didn't even know this house existed, so it's crazy to me. I got here, it was like a 4-hour drive from where I'm at. And so I'm kind of taking advantage of a free living situation. But I mean, I closed the door and I've not heard the quiet in so long, and I didn't realize it. That's one thing that I do miss about the ship, is sometimes you could get yourself into some really beautiful nature, and it's like quiet, and you don't get nature on the ship. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but it's hard, I think, in the quarantine for someone who's I mean, it's hard for everyone, but I just wanted to see what your thoughts are about that, because we can't really see anyone, but at the same time, we're kind of in a period of increased connectivity because of the quarantine, you know, with people doing video chats and stuff like that. So,
yeah. Oh, I completely relate. That's one of the things I miss the most about being on a cruise ship, is those periods where you're just by yourself. Because I am sure, whether you've told me or not, but I'm sure you'd have done the same, where it's been late at night and you can't sleep and you just think, fuck it, I'm going to go out on deck or out to the crew deck, or you just finish a shift. And there's been so many times I worked on the Queen Mary too, and that was a stressful time, you know, working 70, 80 hours a week, 7 sea days, 6 hours off in port, 7 sea days again. It was that for 4 months, and that was my first contract as well. So for me, that was a massive culture change. And what really got me through it was my periods of alone time, walking around this little floating town in the middle of the infinite blackness, because we're in the Atlantic Ocean. And those little laps around promenade deck, listening to a podcast or just listening to the sea, were amazing for me. And I just don't get that anywhere else. I love being alone in that way. especially just the little things you'd see. I remember this one time, especially, we were leaving Hamburg, and because it was my first contract, everything was new and amazing. And, well, not everything was amazing, but everything was really novel. And the thing, what I remember is we'd finished our shift, and it was a formal night, so you know how they are. They're kind of long, and just you just count down the hours. And then I finally had that time to do my little promenade deck laps around. And I remember, as you leave Hamburg, it's quite a bottleneck, and there's a lot of ships parked outside the main. I don't know. I'm not a seaman, so I don't know how to say it. But there's like this little strip where you can leave the port, and then where the pilot takes you for like the next 12 hours as they like sort of drive you out the port. There's this like little alleyway, but the ships, sometimes ships, cargo ships especially, will like dock, anchor either side of this alleyway. And it doesn't really happen in every port you leave, but in Hamburg it does, because it's a really popular shipping channel. And I remember just looking at it and thinking, like, it's like when you look at the stars and they're so bright and there's so many lights and shapes and everything, it was like that, but just immediately close. You had all these ships just dotted around in this really, really black scene, and because of the water, it was just reflecting everything and mirroring the ships, and it was just amazing. Like, it was just me and that moment, and no one else around, obviously, at that time of night. And I just just watched it as like this whole rolling scene rolled by at like 8 knots because the ship was going really slow. And it's just like really mesmerizing is the word, and you don't get that anywhere else, really. I haven't found it yet anyway, a similar thing, and that's what I miss the most, because like you said, on land you won't have that feeling of transcendence, because everything's familiar. You know, looking out my window now, it's the same main road that I've been looking at since I was 5, you know? So there's nothing to connect with in that way. And at the same time, you can't go anywhere either because we're on lockdown. And at the same time as well, I'm locked in the house with my family, and like you said as well, social media and all these other apps, because then you're bored and you don't know what else to do, and you then find yourself on that. And so I've had to really I've found myself having an issue with social media. I've had to delete it, like deactivate it, and then I've gone on and then, you know, removed it and installed apps even just to block myself from using it past a certain time, because it's bad, because it's just this like fabrication of connection. But I don't know, I'm rambling now, but basically what I'm saying is that I completely get what you're saying, being an introvert especially, that I never recharge as much as I did on the ship. I've never also felt the need to recharge as much anywhere else, because it really tires you. But I haven't recharged like that. And what I regret the most, my biggest regret in life, was probably in late February of this year, where I resigned. And for like 5 hours I resigned, or for like one day or whatever. And the next day I got in touch with my company, HR, and said, you know, I sorry, it was an impulse thing, it was a mistake, I shouldn't have done it, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, you know, we can't put you back on the Queen Elizabeth now because we cancelled your travel plans, but we can put you on the Queen Victoria at the end of March, because I was meant to join the Queen Elizabeth on the 6th of March, right before coronavirus.
Wow.
And if I hadn't have resigned, I'd have had this whole lockdown experience up until just a couple of weeks ago. I'd have been on the Queen Elizabeth during lockdown, having those exact same moments like I described in Hamburg, looking at the sunset in Manila Bay, and being out on promenade deck at night, with the added benefit of no guests as well. Wow. So I really regret that, and I lost out on a lot of time just to think and just to meditate and just to be alone and to properly recharge as an introvert. But you know, I can't obviously what's the word, dwell in it. That's life, isn't it? But do you have that similar feeling, those periods of, you know, almost meditation on ships?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was constantly seeking a good spot where I could like consistently find it without any people there. I had a bunch of different spots around But I would always have to like check and make sure. And I constantly felt the need to recharge because you're just around the same people every single day. And it really does get exhausting. So just finding somewhere where you can be like truly alone and, just, I don't know, look out at the sea or the sky. I do really miss, actually. There was this one spot on the promenade deck of Queen Elizabeth. So it was deck 3, pretty close to the water. I would stick my head out and I would just watch the waves roll up underneath the ship. I would just be like in a trance-like state. And I would do this a lot of the time while we were on a set break for like 15 minutes. I would just go out and just watch the waves, have some fresh air. And that's definitely something that I miss. There's something peaceful about hearing the ocean and watching the waves roll in.
Yeah. Because it's like this stimulus that is just enough to stimulate your mind, but not enough to distract you. So it puts you there in that place where you can then truly achieve a sense of flow, I guess, like disconnect, where you can just suddenly zone out and then boom, oh shit, I've got to go back to second set now. I had a few similar moments, and it was just so annoying because like we, as photographers, we'd have to like, you might do as well. Like, did you get like scheduled lunch breaks or dinner breaks, or was it just mostly like when you can between sets and that kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, it was just whenever you can.
Yeah, because what I hated most about working on board was the scheduled half an hour lunch breaks, which for no reason, it could have been so much longer, but the manager would always schedule half an hour because it's just the way it is. And in that half an hour, I sometimes found myself just as needing food just as much as I needed to go out and do exactly what you described. Go out and just look down at the sea to get myself through the day. And you'd have to choose one because you can only do one really in that time. So I had to juggle, flip a coin. And most of the times the food won that battle. But yeah. God, I hope I do go back on a ship one day, even if it's not as a crew member, just to experience that, what you've just described. Because, that is probably it. When I think of ships, I do probably think of, the bow wave, probably the most. Not the crew bar or anything else. It's just the bow wave. Well, I think that's all I have to say. I've pretty much forgotten everything I have said, which is, I don't know.
Same.
That's probably a good thing. But Ben, honestly, thank you so much for your time and everything, because it's just been great getting to know you a bit more as well. Since we've already been friends for a while, it's just nice to actually have a meaningful conversation with someone, because I guess lockdown especially deprives you of that as well. So definitely. Thank you for sharing everything as well.
Of course,
it's not just me; it's other people.
Yeah, as well. I appreciate you having me on. Like I said, I enjoy your podcast. Your voice is really nice to listen to. You got a nice accent.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's been really great to talk and catch up and talk about some really meaningful things. It's made me realize how much I've been deprived of meaningful conversations.
So basically, maybe on that note, we can encourage people to have more meaningful conversations in life.
Yeah.
Start your own podcast if you want to. And I mean, do you want to do a shout out now to people, like to follow you? I mean, is that something you wanted to promote anything, your own podcast? Because now's your chance.
Sure.
There's probably 10 people now listening, so.
Yeah, sure. If you want to check out Peachy Poetry, it'll be on Spotify. There's a pilot out on Spotify and Google Play and all the major ones. They're short episodes. I just read a poem and then I play my narration of the poem with an orchestration that I've created on my computer. Some of the parts are recorded. I've done everything myself on it. So there's some real saxophones and some very fake strings. But yeah, it's just a short little thing. You know, it's pretty relaxing. I talk a little bit about the poem, the poet, and shortly about my orchestration for anyone who's nerdy enough to be into that sort of thing. Yeah. That's I don't know. I guess if you want to check me out on Instagram, I'm Ben_Kean, Kean, Kean. And that's the only social media that I really keep up with that much. I put a TikTok out last week. I don't know.
Oh, did you really? Wow.
Yeah, I did that cover of 50 Cent's Candy Shop. I put it on TikTok because I felt like that was definitely TikTok content, you know.
Yeah. Well, I've not actually got TikTok, but I downloaded it just to watch, you know, just to dip my toe in the water.
Right.
And I quickly, you know, redacted my toe out of the water.
Yeah, I literally never get on except to post stuff because I just people will send me funny TikToks and I think that's great and I want them to continue doing that. But I personally, like, I started looking through it and I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah, I just don't relate. But some people are really natural at it, and you know, crack on. If you can dance, that helps. Yeah, I certainly. That is something we forgot to mention. It's a shame it's a podcast, but if you could see Ben's trademark dance in the crew bar, it's all shoulders. It's no legs. It's
it's very similar to the Bernie
from
Weekend at Bernie's.
There you go. So if anybody wants some inspiration on TikTok, just look at Weekend at Bernie's and you'll be set. Awesome. So this has been episode 3 of the InKleined Podcast with Benjamin Kean. And once again, Ben, thanks for your time. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great evening, day, wherever you are in the world, and stay safe. Boom. Oh, that was good. Yeah, I didn't honestly expect to finish it so well, because last time with Jaden, I just rambled on. I couldn't decide how to finish it, but that just happened naturally. Did that sound good?
Nice.
How I ended it?
That's a good sign off. Yeah, I refrained from saying anything because I wanted you to have it all to yourself.